episode of the Better Two podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and M.Needom, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Hi, gang. Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better Two podcast. Today's guest is Donovon Jensen. Donovon has a story that I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. You have that wonderful job that you're happy at, and you want to get a promotion because, you feel like you're stagnating just a little bit, and you really keep hoping you're getting a promotion. And, well, the boss tells you, well, we're waiting on the budget to open up, or we're waiting for this to happen, and we're waiting for hell to freeze over, because basically that's what's going to happen because it's never coming. So what do? You decide, I need a change. And he did make a change. He takes us on a journey of a change that took him to the near brink of financial ruin, and how he ended up turning it around. Plus, we also talk about his content creation and his talk show or podcast, Happy Talks. So I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Donovon. How are you doing?
Doing excellent. How about yourself?
Good. So you just got off of work and you work for Google as a software engineer. And
Yes, I do.
You have quite the journey of getting there, because you quit your job and then you had an 18-month journey of you had no coding experience. So how did you go to work for Google?
Yeah, so I guess we'll start at where I was to begin with and then unravel this story a little bit. But previous to that, when I was working, I was doing sort of a social media marketing, customer service type of mixed job. And I was doing, okay at that job. And it was one of those situations that you get in corporate life where it's like, oh, we're going to give you a promotion as soon as we get the budget opened up for, oh, it looks like that didn't happen this month, this quarter, this year. So I found myself sort of in a limbo state where I wasn't really progressing. And I actually found myself at one point where I didn't really have a whole lot to do at that job. And I just felt like, you know what, I am not making any progress in my life. I'm not learning. I'm not growing. I'm not accomplishing much. So one of the things that I've always been really interested in is sort of psychology and mental health. And that's what I went to college for, was for psychology. But if you just get a bachelor's in that, then that doesn't open up a whole lot of careers either. So I was, thinking, okay, what are the sort of different pieces, or what is it that I really care about? And I kind of settled on this idea that software is sort of the way to scale a solution to any sort of problem, right? So, if I want to go into this mental health space, sure, I could go and do, a master's degree and learn to be a psychologist and do that. And then, the typical path there is to work one-on-one with people. And I just kept going back to this idea of like scale. How do I build something that really is going to reach a lot of people? So you combine that, these sort of ideas floating around with me getting more and more frustrated with this imaginary promotion that's never actually coming into fruition. And at some point, and this is when I really got clear for me, I realized, okay, what do I have to do to quit here? Because, I kept having this big anxiety around, well, without an income, without a reliable income source, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to pay for my rent? How am I going to eat? And the moment when I really sat down and went, okay, what are the numbers that I need? How much do I have to save that I can give myself a 6-month runway or a 1-year runway? Or I don't remember, because it's been enough years that I don't remember how much time I thought I needed. But, once I actually did the numbers for that, then it was a more straightforward matter of, okay, I'm just going to sit down, save up the money, and then take off when I'm ready. Well, the day that I actually quit was much harder than I anticipated. It was still a lot of anxiety and fear around just like, oh, what am I going to do next? Now, at this point, I didn't actually have a clear idea of, oh, I'm going to go learn to do software and try to work at a big tech company. At this point, I had only got as far as, okay, I really want to do my own thing or try to work on something in the space that I care about, in this, mental health, psychology type space. And I need to buy myself some time. So I quit. I spent the next 3 months after that, I think, trying to make content around mental health, happiness, this kind of stuff. I was making like a video every day and writing articles and doing all this stuff. Now, in retrospect, the big mistake there was that I didn't already have any kind of an audience. So I did get a tiny bit of momentum, but to make money in sort of the content space, you need an audience. So after, 2 or 3 months, I hadn't produced any money, and I lost some money trying to get, this little project started and whatnot. So I had a few more months of money saved up, and I really didn't know what to do for a while. And so I had, as part of that project, started a website and done a little bit of coding on the side, right? Just a little bit of, hey, here's how you change around a couple things, move this over here, change the color of that. And at some point I started getting ads for, hey, if you want to do software for a living, there's this 3-month boot camp that you can go to, and it's completely immersive, and it takes, I don't know, your whole life. You have to give up everything basically to go to one of these. And now I think there's a lot more options. You can kind of pace it out differently, but the one I went to was very intensive. And I figured, I wasn't dating anyone at the time. I didn't have any financial obligations other than myself. I didn't have anything really going on. I decided to move to San Francisco and do that boot camp and start working on that. And I'll pause here for a minute because I feel like I've been rambling for a while.
No,
Did you have
fine.
any questions or anything you wanted to?
I'm listening. I am actively listening because it's your journey. And if I have questions, I will raise my finger, or I will stop you. But continue, please.
All right, I'll go right back into the ramble. So I made it to San Francisco, and at that point, I was really nervous because paying to go to that boot camp had sort of leveraged me up to, I had enough to pay for rent and food there for the duration of the boot camp, plus, a month or two, maybe. So I was really banking on, okay, well, they say that you can get these really high paying jobs right out of this boot camp. I don't know how true it is. I've never met anyone who's gone to one of these things. I don't know that much about the field or anything, but I had that idea rolling around in the back of my head. Well, this is the way that you scale up solutions to anything. So if I ever start my own business, or if I ever work on anything, or have a friend that works on anything, like, this is a skill set I need to have. So anyway, I went to the boot camp. I don't know how much there is to say there, besides that it was a boatload and a half of work, and extremely frustrating. A lot of the people that went into it already had some background, and I guess I just had some small aptitude for it because I was able to, they had sort of a test to get in to make sure, like, oh, do you at least know the very bare minimums or whatever. But anyway, it was a very uphill journey. But, I made progress. Things seemed like they were going all right. Relative to other people in the class, I felt like I was performing, fairly well. I wasn't like falling behind or struggling any more than anyone else was, and everyone was kind of having a rough time. So by the time we sort of got to the end of that boot camp, I felt pretty good. I felt pretty confident. Like, okay, I think I learned all the stuff that I need to know in this 3-month period to really do this software stuff. And then I started applying for jobs, and they sort of, part of that program, they give you someone to help you sort of structure your job search. So I was applying to probably 5 to 10 jobs a day, something like that. Anyways, but I felt good, Yeah. And, I get into it 2-3 weeks, and I've had maybe one interview, and I got absolutely blown out in it. And, so I'm like, okay, well, hasn't been that long, still have enough money, to kind of get things figured out. I have some more runway. So I sort of increased it, right? And I can't remember what the actual numbers were, but I know by the end I had applied to probably around 250, maybe 300 jobs.
Wow.
And I was also applying anywhere, right? Anywhere. And when I say anywhere, I mean anywhere, like any country, any place, anything, because I figured if someone's going to hire me with a bachelor's degree to start writing software, I just need to get my foot in the door somewhere. Mm-hmm. That's not a typical background. A lot of other people have switched out of math majors or statistics or things that are just more analytical in nature or better show that you have some of those skills. So anyway, I got right up to the end of sort of the second month, which is about, all the money I had budgeted for. And a lot of the other people in the cohort were getting jobs, finding stuff. And, I had this dream of like, oh, well, they said that people are getting these 6-figure jobs. I'm starting to get to the point where I don't really care. Like I'll take anything. I'll take less than what I was making at my last job. I need to start making money somewhere, doing something. And it was also paced out in a way that, as I was sort of running out of my financial runway, I was also kind of reconsidering where I was, right? Like, okay, I don't have any money. I'm not making any money. I'm out in San Francisco, or I was in Oakland technically, but it's practically just as expensive.
Yeah.
So, I asked my dad. I said, Dad, can I come home for a few weeks just to get this stuff figured out, and then I'll pick up a job doing anything, doing any kind of software, I'll bag groceries, I'll do whatever I have to do to just get back on my feet. But I didn't plan this stuff out too well. And so, he said, sure, that'd be fine as long as it's, a very temporary thing. And I come home, get stuff figured out, and get back on my feet. Well, I got really lucky in the sense that right after I made it home, I started working with, or I had been working with, a recruiter, and they actually were able to find me a job in Eugene, Oregon.
Okay.
So I went home. I was only home for about a week or two, and then immediately was back off into Oregon. Don't know anything about Oregon. Never been there before, but they said they had a job for me, so I packed my car up and drove out there. I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but so that was the first job. Really rough. I thought I was doing fairly well, but then they implemented a new system that kind of showed the metrics for everyone, and I was dead last, like the least productive. And I was trying really hard. I was working more than 40 hours a week. I was really busting my butt. But I thought, that boot camp had really prepared me, like, oh, I know all the stuff I need to know to be a software engineer now. Not really. It's like the bare minimum to get through the door and then continue struggling to get it figured out.
Yeah.
So from the moment I got there, I had always planned and I knew there were some gaps. Now, there were more than I expected, but I knew there was some. So I thought, after work, a lot of the days, what I'll do is I found a computer science sort of curriculum, but for free online. So I thought, okay, when I'm done with work, I'll go through this curriculum and then get myself, kind of up to speed where like a bachelor's would be for computer science. And then I'll skip all the stuff that doesn't seem relevant at all, because a lot of the time that's all built in, or, you have all your generals and whatnot that I had already done. So I did that. So the situation now is I've got this job, this software job. I'm not doing great, to be honest. And I'm working a ton. And then in my spare time, I'm also studying. Now, I'd always planned, or not always planned, but from the point I got that job, planned to go work for a bigger tech company, because I realized if I ever want to build anything, this goes back to the start of the story, but if I ever want to build anything and scale it up, I don't know nearly enough software from this boot camp to be able to really do that correctly. So anyway, I'm studying and whatnot. And as I'm studying, it's been probably 6 months into that job, maybe 9, somewhere between there. I get a message from a recruiter that says, "Oh, we got your application to Google. Do you want to come have an interview?" And I was like, I didn't apply to Google. I'm not applying to any jobs. Like, what are they talking about? I've just been studying. Well, come to realize that they're actually talking about an application I put in from the boot camp like 6 months previous. Wow. I think Google might be the only company that can wait, 6 to 8 months to respond to a candidate and still have them be interested.
Yeah.
But I figured, hey, I'll give it a shot. Like, I'm just here studying. I will probably get blown out. Like, I'm not even performing very well in this job, but I'll give it a try. So there's a book called Cracking the Coding Interview that's specifically geared towards sort of doing these big tech company interviews. And I went through that, tried to make sure I could solve all the problems, or at least as many of them as I could in the given time frame. And then I flew out, to the Google headquarters, and the way it's set up is there's like 5 rounds of these hour-long interviews, and you're writing code on a whiteboard and solving these problems and whatnot. So I did that, got to the end of that day, and was like, there's no chance. Like, I did so bad on some of these questions. Like, I didn't even start answering the problem, let alone actually finish. And so I just, I got my expectations around, like, I did not perform well enough to make it here, which is okay. Like, it was a good learning experience. I know what I'm up against. I know what kind of questions they ask, or like how hard it's going to be. I could see kind of the distance from where I was to where I wanted to be. And got back, didn't hear anything from the recruiter. A month went by, didn't hear anything. I messaged them and they just said like, oh yeah, we'll get back to you when we get back to you and whatever else. But after about a month and a half, I got a call from the recruiter and they said, hey, so I wanted to give you an update on sort of the application you put in the interviews. But first, how do you think they went? I was like, well, I don't think they went super great. There was definitely a lot of room for improvement. And, the guy's tone was really somber and whatever else. And he's like, well, would you feel if we extended you an offer for whatever amount of money, which was for me, like a complete change in my entire life, like an amount of money that I didn't think you could make at entry level at a job somewhere. And I was like, internally, I was like extremely excited. But externally, I learned from that boot camp, like you need to negotiate and you need to do all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, let me think about it and I'll get back to you.
And inside you're going, yes.
Inside I'm like, I don't know. Do they have like a diversity quota for engineers who don't know how to code, or like what is this?
Is somebody punking me?
No, so yeah. So that's kind of the gist of that part of the story. And then, I thought that I had kind of made it by that point, right? Like, okay, cool. Like, I got this super awesome job. Well, the story's not quite over. When I got there, I sort of had this expectation that they knew what was going on and they had put me in a role or found a position for me that was suitable to where my skills were and what I knew and whatnot. The reality was a little bit different, which was sort of the same as that first job, which was, because I had jumped up to this much higher level company where the baseline is so much higher, their expectations were that I was really good at writing software. So I found myself back in sort of that same situation, just really working, way over 40 hours to try to get caught up on everything. And that lasted for about a year and a half or so before I sort of started to get more comfortable with things and get things figured out and get to a point where I wasn't as worried about things. And there are some other details that I could fill in, but I've been rambling for almost 20 minutes straight now. So I'll be curious what you got, what's going on your end.
Well, the start of your story about your original company telling you, oh, well, the budget hasn't opened up. I'm going to be honest. I was in a position as a supervisor to give reviews, and it would be like, we go in and they're like, okay, the max raise you can give is 3%, but nobody's getting 3%. So as soon as we were given that authority that you're going to do this, they took it right away. So that I can understand completely. Yeah. Oh yeah. We're going to give you a promotion. Yeah. It's going to open. Oh, it didn't open. It's the shenanigans of corporate America. That's just the way it is. And interviews, once again, I was in a managerial position, so I had to interview people. And I got told by my employees after they were comfortable with me being on the job, they were like, I could not tell if I got the job or not. You were so stoic. It was scary. They're like, do you play poker? I'm like, no, I don't. But I'm glad that people were still willing to take a chance on you. It had to be scary as anything to be coming down to that wire where the bottom's going to fall out.
Yeah. So I will say that this experience, more than anything, has challenged me in terms of where my limits are, right? Before I had done any of this, I did well in school. I Had done well at that other job. And, I pushed myself some, but not nearly as hard as this. And there were definitely times where the tank was on empty. And I was just like, I don't know if I can get through this. I don't know. I don't know how to do this. And I don't know if I'm ever going to figure it out.
When you were talking about, the mental health aspect, I know there's apps, there's Quilt, which is an app, a social app that people go on and talk about depression and then talk about mental health issues. So there is that ability for you to create what you want when you get there. That's still there for you to be able to do. And I mean, how many podcasts are out there talking about mental health? And I know yours does too. So, I mean, it's a very positive thing, because as I was telling somebody yesterday, we used to not talk about mental health. We used to not care enough about mental health. If you had a problem, we didn't want to know about it. Put your little mask on and hide, because we don't want to hear about it. And
yeah, you definitely. Oh, good. Sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you see it very different depending on the people that you're interacting with, right? There's still a very strong contingent of, oh, you have mental health issues, like just go figure those out on your own.
Yeah. Well, that comes with the older generation, I think, because, and I mean, first episode was my mom's suicide. I talked about that. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because when she tried to OD and we called the paramedics, the neighbors were all outside with the police department and the fire department and the ambulance driver, because you made a 911 call. And this is 1983, 85, somewhere in there. And everybody's out and they're looking. And here I am at 16 years old, roughly, going, oh, she has the stomach flu or something. Because I'm not going to tell them that she tried to kill herself. There's no way. The embarrassment of it all. So you sit there and lie to the neighbors that are all gawking, and some have the balls to actually come over there and say, hi, everything okay? Now, are you really concerned, or are you just going to go gossip? So, but that was the 80s.
Well, it's crazy to me because, I moved around so much the last few years to see the differences in places in their positions by like area, right? And just the type of people that are in a certain area, or, because I think about, I'm originally from Utah. And if I think about, in Utah, I don't know how much progress has really been made in the last, 20 or 30 years there. And that's a state with a very high rate of suicide. And it's sort of the same thing, like, are people actually checking in on each other, or are they trying to get gossip and figure it out? And it's just really sad to sort of see those sorts of interactions when there's a level of more authentic sort of connection and community that there can be to sort of support people. And there's so many people just like struggling in the depths of misery.
Well, and COVID has really done a number on everybody. I mean, I don't, whether you actually had it or just the experience of being locked down, just our whole world has been turned completely upside down. And I want to say it's fractured all of us, whether we admit it or not. There's a slight fracture in all of us now, because it's like, how do we move on, and when do we progress? When will life ever get back to some normalcy? It's never going to go back to what it was. And at what point are we going to have to provide, a passport, a vaccine passport, or something else to prove everything? And how long is that going to last? Because COVID hopefully eventually will die out. And are we still going to be presenting this? Our world is different.
Right. Yeah. And you add into that sort of going back to this mental health piece, it's really shaking things up for people in a negative way for the most part. And things that were already a struggle in a lot of places, like a sense of community and connection, are further driven apart by not only the virus, but the fact that there are differing opinions on how to handle it and what we should be doing and things like that. It's really been a tough time for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know that but if you step back, we were already headed to that divide when, dare I say, President Obama got elected. We started seeing a divide grow, and it just continued to grow when Trump got elected, and then the virus happened. And and the thing is, when you get down to it, we're all human beings. And we need to, you're not going to change somebody's opinion by posting a meme. You're not going to change an opinion by screaming at somebody because your sandwich isn't made to your liking. or calling the cops because of that. Great. You can go on and become social media famous for whatever reason, maybe lose your job and whatever. But was it worth it? And did you really garner anything from that? You know?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find really interesting. And obviously, I'm still working through my own journey, but a sense of actual community and connection as opposed to, because I think one of the strongest threads right now is sort of what you're talking about, where it's like, how do I make this 10-second video slam dunking on someone else who's in my community about something stupid to get a bunch of views? And I just feel like the sense of community for a lot of places and a lot of people and a lot of groups and stuff is really splintered. Now it's kind of interesting too, because there's all these online places that you can go to sort of foster some of these communities. But I guess, yeah, I just feel this strange sort of underlying current where the actual face-to-face communities that a lot of people are in, people are not treating each other very well. And I don't know what that's been like historically, because maybe there weren't all these videos and maybe it's been the same as it's always been. But it doesn't feel great to just see that pushed everywhere and see that stuff so popular.
Well, and I think, okay, well, everybody knows about Book Talk blowing up. If you're an author, you should be on Book Talk on TikTok because it's the place to be. And then somebody posted because they got triggered by a book. And so then this whole battle started within the community where readers were turning on authors and authors were turning on readers and authors were turning on other authors. And it's like, are you guys winning any prizes here? Is this some kind of, what is the point of all this? So we create trigger warnings. Okay, fair enough. If you don't want a trigger warning, then that's on you. But it's got to be a point where what's going to be beneficial to everybody, attacking each other is not going to do it. And I'm sure there's the same thing with you rapping, because you do poetry and rapping, and people will start dissing you for whatever reason, and there's no reason for it. When does the armchair jockey decide to step off his high horse and get with the program and try to relate to everybody instead of tearing everybody down? But I had a conversation earlier with a guest, and he was talking about how, we look at people that are below us as that we're above them. The people that are the same as us, well, we look at them kind of like, well, you're not as good as us. And then the people that are above us, we try to pull them down, which is true. So why can't we just take away that classist attitude and try to see that we're all human?
Yeah, that's some of the stuff that I'm most interested in terms of how do you actually get people from one place to the other, because when you think about what's most useful or what's most productive for you as an individual, just purely from a selfish perspective, right? Just for me, what's the best for me? Well, the most helpful thing is actually finding ways to connect and sort of be with people instead of against them, because the more people I turn against me personally, the more enemies I have, and the more people I have on my side, the more resources and tools I have at my disposal to get things done and sort of be more productive. And the reason I bring this up is because I myself was one of these people that used to go online and fight all the time about random stuff or just be a troll. Like when I was in college or maybe before, but I used to go on and just fight people about random stuff all the time. And it's the same things that I see all the time of like, not trying to understand the other person's perspective, trying to score points on them, trying to make other people look bad. Kind of like you were saying, across the different like ranges of people, or how I saw myself relative to people, pulling people down or kicking them while they're down or whatever else. And even from a purely selfish perspective, that's not a good strategy.
No. And well, here's the thing. I was guilty of it. I had my memes that I would post about who I did not like politically. And at a certain point, after my husband passed, I'm like, you realize you're just standing there on the precipice screaming into a void, and you're not changing anybody's opinion. You're wasting your energy, and you've had enough going on. Just step away. And that kind of, I've lived by that since then. I don't get into these political wars anymore. I don't get into that. I've stepped back from that because it's toxic. not only for the
Yeah.
person I'm arguing with, but for myself.
Yeah. I think that's one of the strongest realizations, at least that I've had, that was the most useful, was realizing that not only am I not accomplishing my goals, right? Because I would go through and sort of be mean to people or try to show them how stupid they looked or how bad their argument was or whatever else. But not only was I not convincing them of anything, wasn't making any progress, not useful in any in those terms, I also didn't feel good coming out of it most of the time. Now, sometimes I felt a little self righteous and hoity toity and whatever else. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, I didn't really feel good about it. And it didn't produce anything towards my goals. And I think that's maybe some of the confusion is people think that they're doing the right thing or trying to sort of move the needle in a positive direction. Some people don't care. But for the
Yeah.
most part, I think people think they're doing something good. But when you look at what's actually effective, there has to be much more understanding and communication and a much softer entry point.
But if we want to look back at the Karen phenomenon, let's just go with Karen. And yes, that did happen before COVID because I had a Karen on me one day. But because I have a parking placard, I have a handicap parking placard, and I drove from a bookstore to a gas station. I was picking up my husband from dialysis, and I stopped to get gas. And this woman got out of her car and comes over to me and she says, "You're not supposed to have that and drive." And I just looked at her. I said, "I'm not going that far." And she's like, "You're not supposed to have." I'm like, "Get back in your car. Just get back in your car. You don't need to say anything." But no, just get back in your car. I mean, there was no reason for it. So there was an early Karen. But I think part of it is look at me, look at the attention I've garnered. I've hit all this. Now that's come back to haunt some of them because they think they're one upping somebody and then they end up losing their job. They end up, you know, we've seen it happen where some of them have gotten death threats, I've heard. So, but I think COVID and being locked down has taken down our societal norms of how we're supposed to act in public. And some of us have become a little bit bratty.
Yeah, so I'm going to open up another thread of
Go ahead.
conversation. But I actually finished a book last year, and it's something that I worked on for 4 or 5 years called Mindscaping. But the whole concept of the book is like, how do you optimize for happiness? And I think it actually fits really well into this conversation because part of that book is talking about values and how people use really bad strategies with their values sometimes to try to produce happiness, but in ways that are not reliable. And I think it's a prime example of that, right? Where it's, you have sort of this value around, in that case, it's probably something around like justice or whatever else in the case of your parking thing or your
Mm-hmm.
driving thing, right? And they have this value that they're trying to serve to produce happiness, but the method that they actually use to do that is not good or useful. And I think that's why we see so much of this like dunking on each other and whatnot is because we're trying to fulfill these other values. And this is me kind of
Oh.
philosophizing a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
we try to fulfill these like specific values, but the methods that are available aren't always ones that are reliable or useful. And I think another example that I like to use is sort of if you have there was a guy that I met who was not very pleasant to be around. And he was talking about like, oh, I make this much money and I slept with this girl and this girl and this one. And I was just like, what is wrong with this guy? And
Yeah.
then I took a second to kind of like decompose that. And I was like, okay, so the values that I would take that he's trying to meet are like connectedness, right? Like a sense of connection or a sense of worth. However, the means he's using to do that is just like trying to sleep with as many people as possible. Or I later found out in the conversation that he was talking about his family in relation to money a lot. So I think, sort of the value under that was something closer to make my family proud. But then the means he was using to do that was just the number of dollars he was making.
Right.
Anyway, to bring this whole thing together, I think, I think that's where you see a lot of these things develop is sort of people are trying to serve these values and make themselves happy. But the actual methods for doing that are just not reliable in the long term.
Well, and then if you unpack that a little bit further, because going back to that guy you were talking about and the family history, if the family has sat there and raised him to make him feel belittled, that we don't have either, we didn't have enough money, or we had too much money and now you want to keep up with dad, or money is everything. It's the underground values that if you don't break those cycles growing up, you're going to be destined to repeat those things, because those values are who you are from your parents. You have to consciously say, I am not going to be that person, that their expectations are not my expectations. I'm going to live my life for me. But obviously he thought that, dare I say, what the image was painted, what you've portrayed to me is the 80s Playboy with the girls and the money. And I need to, do you have a Coke problem too, sir? No, no, I mean, just the way if you have to talk about that much, are you really happy with that life? Or are you just using it to put on airs?
And that's where the conversation got interesting, is when I got past that, I make this much money, to that sort of, well, I hate this job, but when you from my family, you can't make less than this. And that's when all the gears started turning and everything started unraveling. But I think it's really common that people don't consciously spend time sort of stepping back and reflecting on how some of their values were created, and how the history of some of those things plays into how they're living. And I don't know, because a lot of the people that I know have been under 30, so maybe a lot of people later in life run into these walls and start actually thinking about it. But in the circles that I've been in general, a lot of people have not ever stepped back to do that. And more and more, I don't think that there's ever in a magical time in life that just happens to you. Yeah.
I think you have to, it ends up happening when something major happens in your life. And I mean, nowadays for some people, it does not ever happen. I mean, I look at my dad, nothing will ever change his mindset. And I'm like, okay, whatever, that's you're going to do you. But I think if something happens in your life to make you step back and have to reevaluate your life, like losing a job, losing a family member, losing a loved one, those things make you stop and go, okay, what is my life, and where am I going to be? Where do I fit in now? And that makes you stop and go, okay, for your generation, do you guys ever get to stop, really? Because I mean, my generation, we got to unplug. I was talking about this earlier with somebody. We knew phone numbers. We didn't have the constant bombardment all the time of somebody knowing where we were. Now, I mean, I love my cell phone. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to knock it. But now you don't get to unplug, really, unless you force yourself. I mean, I've had a friend come over, and for the first time in a long time, I turned my phone over and put it away for 5 hours, which that's like a record. But we don't necessarily do that. We give people the ability to find us. So how can you take time to reflect if all of a sudden you're sitting there trying to, we'll say, meditate, and you hear, ding, it's social media. And just like a dog, you're going to pick up that phone and go, okay, what's my reward?
Yeah. And you see, I mean, yes, the people that are in my generation and a little bit younger, that has 100% been their entire life. Mm-hmm. But now also it's almost everybody, right? Like if I go home, I have a decent sized family and extended family and whatnot. If I go home, a good chunk of the visit together with everyone is everyone just on their phones.
Right. I didn't mean that. I know now we are that way. I'm just saying beforehand, we didn't have that. So that's all.
Yeah, no. It's just surprising to me. It's surprising to me how much, because I try to be very, very conscious with my phone time and like how I've set up my notifications, and to make sure that I'm present in the times that I want to be. And don't get me wrong, I'm nowhere near perfect at this. There are plenty of times that my phone is going off. In fact, this watch always goes off when I'm meditating. Always.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to me how rare it is that this is actually the case, because most of the time, if I talk to, friends or family about like, oh, hey, do you want to be less distracted by your phone? I think there's a wave of, oh yeah, I shouldn't be on my phone as much. But then the actual action around sort of limiting those notifications or changing them or whatever else isn't really there. And I think you're 100% right that with the constant stimulation, it's almost impossible to step back and reevaluate some of the bigger picture things like values and whatnot and make sure that you're living in alignment with them, unless you really, really set out the time to do it.
Well, and then there comes this whole other caveat. You know, are you willing to confront your shadow self? Are you willing to confront the darker sides of your personality? Because that can be a scary thing all in itself.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Going back to what you're saying, when a crisis sort of shows up that forces you to do that, because otherwise you probably don't want to, and there's probably not enough pain or misery in your life to get you to do it. You have to find some sort of point that pushes you over the edge and say, like, okay, now I'll do this hard work.
And it's not something that's going to change overnight. I mean, you can look at it and they'll be like, okay, I've dealt with it, but I guarantee you it's going to come back and haunt you again, because you have to keep working through it and mining through it and analyzing it and sorting it, because otherwise your brain, especially as a younger person, tends to protect you from the truth, a truth that may seem, you may have played it off as something minor when it was actually something really major. But as a younger person, and I'm talking even in your 20s, you still kind of play it off as like, oh, it's no big deal. When the truth of the matter is, if you unpack it, it was something big. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's an interesting angle. I'm sort of unpacking it in my own head a little bit, because, I guess, tell me if this is what you're saying, which is there can be events that people are sort of looking at as like, oh, this is not that impactful. It didn't matter to me that much. Hasn't really shaped me that much or changed me or whatever else, depending on what the event is. But if you were to do the work, like if this is the easiest example, but if you were to go to therapy and talk about it for 4 sessions or whatever, you would actually find that it is very important or has had a large impact on you. I don't know. Tell me how much I landed.
It is that, but I'll give you an example that's short and sweet. And it had nothing to do with being in therapy. I had gotten in a fight with my stepfather. His hands were around my neck. When I was 20 years old, I took it and I ran with the statement of, we had a physical altercation. When I hit my 40s, my mind decided to really look at this because I was watching something on TV and they were like, well, that's attempted murder. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second. His hands were around my neck. They weren't to give me a hug. It really wasn't a physical altercation. If his hands were around my windpipe and he was squeezing, that means he was attempting to kill me. But at the time, my mind could not handle that. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so
I think
sometimes our mind will sugarcoat something, and then something will trigger it to give you an epiphany.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I actually just read a book with sort of the sciencey version of the exact same thing, which is I guess your brain has some mechanism set up for traumatic events, and the more traumatic they are, the harder that system in your brain works to find some sort of interpretation that allows you to sort of continue moving on with things, as opposed to really, really getting stuck. Now, obviously, there's all sorts of instances of trauma where people do get stuck. But I wish I could remember any of the details of that. That's the curse of reading a bunch of books and not taking notes.
It happens. And I mean, we're like we were talking about, we're bombarded with information so much that there's the nugget, but it's like you can't remember all the details. So I get it. I completely get it. So let's talk about something happy. You went on YouTube and you decided you were going to do your poetry, and you were going to rap your poetry. Is that how this played out?
Yeah. So this is an interesting story. Let's see. Where is the best entry point here? So my entire life, basically, I've been interested in poetry and sort of rhyming and those kinds of things. And, I'd kind of written stuff in a notebook here and there and, sent some cheesy poems to girls when I was really young to try to impress them and whatever else. But I never took it too seriously, and I never did a whole lot with it. But I guess I just had too much time in college, or I'm not sure how I really first stumbled into this. But I sort of got onto this internet community of rap battles that were only text, which is very niched, sort of strange.
Okay.
But, it was really interesting to me because at that time I had only done the writing piece. So, and I liked rap music. I listened to rap music ever since I was a little kid. So it was kind of a mesh of those two things that didn't force me to be vocal because I hated my vocals. I was extremely nasally, really bad. I had no, vocal training to project or to do anything. I hated my voice. Anyway, so I started doing these sort of like text rap battle stuff, and that was fine. And then after I was doing that for a while and started building up, some more skill, I learned a little bit more about the structure of rhymes and how to compose different things. More and more people on that site, I started making friends on there, were pushing me to sort of do audio. And I was like, I really don't want to do this. But eventually, like, there was enough pressure and momentum behind me that I started doing that. So these exist somewhere. Please don't go look them up. Anyone, don't find these. But there are some like rap battles that I have on this out there. And they just didn't feel very authentic, but I still wanted to, participate in this community. For me, it was about kind of mixing, being competitive. I'm fairly competitive with sort of this other thing that I liked with poetry. Anyway, not good. My vocals were not good. And I got feedback as such constantly. So what the arc sort of looked like is I would spend, a month working up the courage to do one of these, get absolutely blown out, have everyone say that it's terrible, lose. But then that competitive part of me would kick back in. And then I'd eventually go back and do it again. Now, this whole time I was doing the writing piece, much, much stronger in the writing piece. Still true to right now, I'm much better at writing than I am vocalizing. So at a certain point, I got pretty good at that, even though I was still really bad at the vocal parts. People on the site kept asking me sort of the same questions over and over again. They would say like, oh, how do you sort of do a multi-syllable rhyme, or how do slant rhymes work, or these more structural writing components. And, I would type up a thing and explain it to them and send it to them. Type up a thing, send it to them, explain it to them. And I got sick of it. And I was like, why don't I just make a video? I'll just make a video. Anytime somebody asks me this question, I'll just send it to them. And I don't have to keep, typing this up with minor variations and whatnot. So I did that, and I didn't really think much of it. And, some more people asked questions. So I did a couple more videos and whatnot. And, I just kind of blinked and looked up, and then all of a sudden there was quite a big, or at least relative to what I was used to, following in number of viewers on some of these videos. The views were in like the tens of thousands. Wow. And I was getting subscribers, in the thousands, which again was just much more than I expected. So then, it came back to this sort of piece around actually vocalizing. And so, I had gotten a little bit of momentum from the writing and from some of the explanation type stuff that I had a little bit more confidence. So I started recording music and stuff, but I got the same feedback. Like, this doesn't sound good. No one likes this. You sound ridiculously nasally. Well, at some point, I actually realized that, I tried to figure out like what's going on. Why is my voice so nasally? Like, this seems to be to the point that there has to be something, because I've gotten the feedback so many times. It's not just people, being mean for no reason. Mm-hmm. Well, I played soccer growing up too, competitive soccer. And I guess I, at some point, really busted up my nose bad. Yeah. So my septum was severely deviated. So I had to go get nose surgery and a bunch of stuff. And anyway, that's kind of an aside. But that helped a lot with that piece. Anyway, in the meantime, I was still making videos, and a lot of it was just around people asking questions, right? How do I do this? How do I do that? And over time, I sort of developed more of that skill based on what people were asking. So people would say, how do I rap in double time? And I'd be like, I have no idea. So then I would go on the internet and do the research and make a video for it. And actually, this factors back into the original story, which is this was sort of growing as I was doing that other job. And at a certain point, I was like, I could probably just do this. I could probably just do this rap stuff and make that happen. And then I tried that as one of the projects I did over a few months, because I had made a course and I was selling that. This story has gotten really rambly, but I made a course and was selling that. And I made a few courses in that time, but none of the other ones sold anything. So that was one of the failed projects I made in between before I started figuring out the software stuff. But all in all, sort of, it was just this slow journey of like, okay, I made something, I'll put it out in the world. Everyone hates it. Okay. But I'm really competitive. So I'll try again, and just, I got crushed. But once I tried to do it to make money off of it, that really killed the love of it for me for a while. So only in this last year or so have I starting to write again and think about sort of making music and stuff like that.
So then when did the Happy Talk podcast start?
Oh, goodness. That was right before the start of the pandemic. Okay. So I met my co-host once before the pandemic started. And the story there was I'd been doing the Google work. I dropped sort of the rap stuff. I dropped, I was doing like some blogging and stuff around mental health and happiness. I dropped all that stuff so that I could try to figure out software. And then once I was kind of getting more comfortable with it, it just happened to align with someone reaching out and saying, oh, hey, I have this program, about stress management and all this stuff. Do you want to take it? And I was like, well, I feel like I have a decent background in some of this stuff and use a lot of these techniques already and whatnot. That conversation somehow evolved into, hey, neither of us are making content. We want to start making content again. Let's do a weekly show and sort of hold each other accountable. And then after we did that for a while, we were like, well, we should probably get some guests on and start talking to people who are experts in a wide variety of things instead of, just what our experience is. So that's how that piece fits into the puzzle.
So you've created a lot then. And since you're going to get back into writing and making music, will there be more videos on the YouTube channel then?
Yeah. So in the last few months, I put out a couple. I'm really rusty and also at the ends of sort of my knowledge for some of the topics. So it'll probably be pretty slow. Like I need to get back to sort of learning some of the things before I'm able to explain any more things. I also found out through that channel that people really like me explaining stuff and don't really care about my art, which is okay. I've accepted it at this point. I'm 100% okay with it. But I also need to figure out what the balance is there, because obviously creating my own art is a lot faster and easier than really going deep into some of this technical stuff.
Well, as I've talked to musical guests on my show, and they've talked about how social media has become such a big part of their lives, because it's like, yes, they can do their creative part, but then they have to go on social media and do marketing. Even though they have professionals helping them market, they still have to put themselves out there. So it's a huge thing. And then, YouTube, yes, YouTube's been around forever, but TikTok's now taking off, and now Instagram's using Reels, and then Facebook's going to do this. And when do you just go, okay, I need to breathe? So is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to add?
Oh my goodness. I think we talked about my entire life in a very non-linear way. I don't think there's anything else that I have to add. We've talked about pretty much every project I've touched in my life and everything I've done. So no, we've covered it nice and well.
Well, thank you, Donovan, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Donovan, he had an interesting story. And, I think that we actually need to look at when you have an idea that you really want to pursue, and if you work hard at it, sometimes it actually works out. And there was a lot of risk involved, and there was a lot of chances he may fail, but he actually did it. And he realized he wasn't the best coder, but he still kept going. And that's the thing. Sometimes we have to keep going. We have to keep pushing through to make things happen. We have to realize that, life isn't always going to be so easy. Sometimes we have to, and I don't want to use the term pull yourself up by the bootstraps, because sometimes that doesn't even help. But if you have enough belief in yourself and you're willing to work and commit, then you can get things done. You can make things happen. And, sometimes when somebody's giving you an insult, such as, you can't sing, there's actually a reason for it. And he didn't even know until after he went to the doctor for his nose. So if, because we talked about depression, and I think if you ever have a situation where you're not really feeling well and you're feeling down, once again, as I've said before in many episodes, please reach out to somebody, because you have people that care about you, people that respect you, and people that would miss you. So understand that. And on that note, as always, well, if you have a question, comment, I would love to hear what you guys think about the show. I've been putting out episodes and it's been quite a while. So if you have a question, comment, concern, you want to say hi, just do it, because, I feel like sometimes, granted, I love doing this, but sometimes I just wonder if you guys are like, man, this broad doesn't know what she's talking about. So leave me a comment, question, or concern. You can do it at send me an email, Donna, DAUNA at better2podcast.com. You can go watch YouTube video. You can say a comment there. However, just, give us some feedback. We want to know if we're doing a good job. I have an audio guy now. He would like to know if the podcast sounds much better now. Rich would love to hear some feedback as well. So you can email us. It's fine. We don't bite. I promise. Not much anyway. Anyway, if you have missed an episode and you would like to catch up, you can go to better2podcast.com. You can find all our social media links there as well. And if you want to leave a review, well, there's Apple. There's also Podchaser, and I'm sure there's a couple other pages that I'm not familiar with, but you can leave a review. However you want to participate in the show, please do. We welcome it. And on that note, I hope you have a great day, evening, or weekend, whenever you choose to listen. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye. The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio Productions.